So I'm going to start things off with a little film clip.
Does your dog bite? No? Oh. Nice doggy. I thought you said your dog did not bite.
That is not my dog.
All right, so that's from a movie in the 1970s, Return of the Pink Panther. Any Pink Panther fans out there? All right, got one in the front. So what makes this funny? What makes this funny is something called the Cooperative Principle. So also in the 1970s, there was a man named Paul Grice who conceived of the idea of trying to explain a bit about how humans talk to each other. This is not about computers. But he came up with this thing called the Cooperative Principle, which means most of the time that you and I are having a conversation, we are trying to be helpful. I'm trying to use words and concepts that you'll be familiar with. You're trying to listen attentively, ask me follow-up questions, things like that. And Grice came up with a bunch of maxims to explain these things. And the reason that this is funny is because the hotel clerk is breaking one of these maxims, which is the Maxim of Relevance. The dog that Inspector Clouseau is talking about is there in the room, but the dog that the hotel clerk is talking about is a dog that nobody knows exists. It's only his dog, and it's not relevant. So that means that the normal cooperative communication style is broken, and something unexpected happens. Now, what does this have to do with what I'm going to be talking about, which is conversation design, or basically designing for voice user interfaces and other conversational systems? Well, one of the ways that we measure whether something works well or not is through this cooperative principle. So I know you were just asked how many people have maybe had an interaction with a voice user interface. How many people out there have had a frustrating experience with a voice user interface? Me, every day of my life. And one of the reasons that they're often frustrating is not because of the technology. I mean, that's sometimes the problem. But many times it is because of poor design. So what I talk to people a lot about is how to improve these systems through good design practices. So what does a conversation designer, what does it mean? Conversation design is how we create experiences that teach computers how to communicate like humans and not the other way around. Now, these conversational experiences can take place in a variety of forms. For the Google Assistant, for example, it can be in the voice-only experience, a smart speaker like the Google Home. It could also be on your phone, where you might be speaking, but you might also be typing or tapping or swiping. This is still considered a conversational interface. And then, of course, we're expanding to things like in your car and on your watch and other places like that. And this conversation design practice applies to all these different surfaces. So I've been doing this for a long time, and we often get a lot of pushback. Why do I need to hire a conversation designer? Why do I need to pay somebody to do this thing? I've been having conversations since I was a toddler. How hard can it be? Well, I want to walk you through a little exercise that kind of just gives us a sense for how complex human communication really is. Let's say I came to you and I said, I want you to design a chatbot for me. I want you to design a chatbot that helps somebody order lunch. That's it. Now, the way that we usually start expressing our design for these systems is through something called a sampled dialogue. It's kind of like a movie script. It's like a back and forth between the user and the system. And it's a great way to iterate on your design, share it with other people, and find flaws up front. OK, so you come back to me with your sample dialogue. You say, here you go, Cathy. I've designed this chatbot. It's going to be awesome. So it's pretty straightforward. Chatbot says, how can I help you? The user may say, I'd like a tuna salad. You ask what kind of dressing. Tell them it's going to be $11. Use a credit card. The end. You're like, that was easy. This is a closed domain. It's going to go pretty straightforwardly. Now, the reason this example even came to me is because not that long ago, I was myself ordering a tuna salad. And I want to walk you through what the real conversation looked like. This was just around the corner. So I walked into this cafe. Cashier says, how can I help you? And I say, can I please have the tuna salad? But then I pause, because this tuna salad order has 3 parts. The salad, croutons or bread, and what kind of dressing. And we as humans can only take in so much information in the auditory channel at once. So I'm watching him as he presses buttons on the cash register, because if I speak too quickly, he'll probably forget what I said, and I'll have to say it again. So I watch, and I can see when he's ready to take in another bit of information, and I say, with croutons. I see him press a button. But now I've got a problem, because I go to 2 different places to order salads, and they have 2 very similar sounding dressing names. One is honey lemon, one is lemon herb, and I can't remember which dressing is at this place. So I express that through my voice, through my intonation. And the lemon herb dressing or whatever? And by doing this, he understands that maybe I don't know the right name. And how does he respond to this? He doesn't say anything. He doesn't even look at me. He just presses a button and kind of nods. And I understand. Oh, he knows which dressing I mean. It's all good. And then I finally thing is to go. So at that point, he says it'll be $11. But then he throws another question at me, unless there's anything else. And I don't say anything. I just hand him my credit card. And that's it. So the reason I give this illustration is to show you that when we're talking to people, so much more is going on than those individual words. We've got eye gaze, we've got body language, we've got pauses, we've got intonation. And the computer has access, at this point, to none of these things. And so we are left only with words. And so we must cram all the meaning into these words and not rely on all the things that we take for granted as humans every day when we communicate. This is a little hard to see, but this is one of my favorite examples of kind of how dumb our computers still are. So this was a tweet by a guy named Paul the trombonist. He was texting with his wife using voice, and they finished their conversation, but the voice accidentally got left on, and he went off to practice his trombone, and the voice assistant did its darndest to keep up with that conversation and started, transcribing his trombone playing as woo, 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 hoo, 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 wah, 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 whoop, whoop, whoop. I love how they've got all these sounds available. But here's a case, where if you were the human on the other end and you started hearing the trombone, you'd be like, well, that's not for me. This conversation is over. But our computers have very little common sense, so they don't understand that this is not actually part of the conversation. Language is also ambiguous. So let's say you say to me, do you want coffee? And I say, coffee will keep me awake. Show of hands, how many people here think I just said, no, I do not want a cup of coffee? All right, how many people here think I said, yes, I would like a cup of coffee? Well, it depends, right? If it's this morning, I'm probably going to say yes. If it's right before bed, this probably means no. And again, ambiguity, we handle this in our daily lives all the time. But computers really struggle with this type of communication. Language is not the only part. As I mentioned before, pauses play a huge role in how we speak. When you and I are having a conversation, the time between our turns is like 200 milliseconds. It's the blink of an eye. If the pause between our turns is longer than that, that is information. If I say, can I get a ride tomorrow morning? And more than a second goes by, something's up. You probably don't want to give me a ride. So even though it was your turn to talk, I'm probably going to take my turn back, and I'm going to say, yeah, you're probably too busy. Maybe next Friday. You didn't even say anything. This was only 1 second of time, and yet so much information is communicated in that time. By the way, a no, if you ask someone a yes-no question, a no response takes a smidgen longer for them to say than a yes response. All right, another thing that's really important to think about this new practice of conversation design. Some of you may be familiar with website design or app design or something like that. When you design a website, typically the way you go about it is first you do the structure. So what is the page layout going to be? What are the color schemes? What are some of the images? And you're going to put in filler words like lorem ipsum all throughout to show where the words are going to go. And at the very end, you're like, OK, now we'll push in the content, and that'll be the website. But with conversation design, the words are the structure. And so you cannot rely on like, oh, we'll go build the whole architecture, and then we'll just squeeze in the words later. I'll give you an example, a real example of this. So if you're thinking about business hours, this is something, just a straightforward practical task. If you do this on, say, your phone or your website, then basically, no matter what question I ask that's related to asking for business hours, you're going to show me a table, right? Here are all the times this restaurant is open. And then I do the work of deciding what the answer to my question is. Like, is it open for lunch on Mondays? What time's it close on Fridays? I do the work and look at that information. But what if we wanted to do this in a voice-only situation, like through a smart speaker like the Google Home? It becomes a very different task. So there's all sorts of ways that someone might ask for information about their favorite sushi restaurant. But imagine if all you did was take the information on the screen and start reading it out loud to the person. So I say, what time is Sushi Ku open? And it says, Sushi Ku is open on Mondays from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Sushi Ku is open on Tuesdays from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Sushi Ku, that's a horrible experience, right? And it's also very hard for us to process. So actually, my colleague who was working on this found that he had to come up with 66 different syntactic structures to answer these varieties of questions. So for example, the second one, is Sushi-ku open? That is a yes-no question. The first part of the response should be either yes or no, whereas some of the other questions are not yes or no. And additional information, like no, but it will open in 1 hour at 11 o'clock. That's much more like a human would respond. A human, again, would not reel off this long list. They would try to cut to where's the most important bit and just give you that. So again, this is a reminder that you have to figure this out at the start. If somebody goes off and codes the whole thing, and then you're like, wait, I need all these different sentences, they're like, too late. So you have to think about this right from the get-go. So how do we do that? How do we get it right? Well, back to that sample dialogue I showed you. It seems really almost oversimplistic. And many times, even though I preach, yes, we should do these sample dialogues, I meet with developers, and then they're halfway done, and I'm like, well, show me your sample dialogues. And they say, well, I didn't do those. So I encourage everyone, this is a really low-cost way to really find out if your design is even maybe worth doing. People are very excited about voice, right? But I'm excited about voice, but it is not the right fit for every task out there. Sometimes it is faster to just do something on your phone or by tapping or whatever. So first you got to think, is it even a good idea? So we encourage everyone who's even thinking about this, just write some sample dialogues. Then you read them out loud, like a table read, like you're in Hollywood. And you have people come play the part of the user, because guess what? You'll say your thing as the computer, and they will come up with something that you did not even expect. That happens all the time. So that's how we recommend everybody get started. I'm going to walk you through a couple of specific examples just to give you a little more context. So for those who don't know, the Google Assistant is a platform, and anyone in the world can build their own what we call conversational actions on this platform and release them to the world and try them out. And so when you want to invoke one of these things, you just say OKG. I say OKG and not the whole thing because everyone's phones will start responding. Well, people with Androids. And so you say OKG and then talk to the name of your conversational action. So pretend we've just built one called Cool Animal Facts. So it says, welcome to Cool Animal Facts. What animal would you like to know about? And the user might say, I love penguins. Cool, penguins. Do you want to know about their habitat or what they like to eat? What they like to eat. You give them some very interesting information about penguins, and then you follow up with another question, and then the person says they're done, and that's the end. A couple things I want to point out here that are often missed when people build these, because there are a lot of very bad voice experiences out there, and it's often because they're breaking some of these really straightforward rules. Number one, set the stage. What the heck can your action do? Often I see things like, welcome to my cool action. How can I help you? I don't know. I mean, what can you do? How the heck am I, the user who's never used this before, supposed to know? So we make a very clear statement. This is animal facts. OK, that's straightforward. And then we do a call to action. We don't say, ask me a question. What do you want to know? How can I help you? Way too vague for the way the technology works today. What animal do you want to know about? That is a very straightforward question. Again, at every step, the computer ends with a call to action, either a question or instruction. Because we don't have the ability to do this like small talk and use eye gaze and things like that to know when it's your turn. We need to signal it's the other person's turn. And then finally, the last question that the user was asked was, would you like to hear more about penguins or another animal? But guess what? The user didn't say either of those things. They said, I'm done, thanks. You need to recognize that people will say things outside of the exact question you ask. Another example, this is one of my favorite features on the Google Assistant that I use all the time. When I'm traveling, I just say, hey, G, is my flight on time? And it comes back and says, yes, hopefully. It's leaving at 1 p.m. Now, again, you might look at this and say, so what? Looks pretty simple to me. But imagine if you were tasked with this project. You're the project manager. You already have an app that displays all the airline information. And the engineer says, just push it out there. Just start reading it out. And so you can imagine in another world where I say, is my flight on time? And it says, flight 1236, Alaska Airlines, departing SFO at 3 p.m. Duration is 2 hours, 3 seconds. I don't care. I know it departs from SFO. That's where I always depart from. I don't care what the flight number is. So again, you have to pull out the little bits that are the most important, and that's what you tell the user. I'm going to do one more example of best practices. Let's say you build a conversational action called Zombie Quiz. And the first question is, you're being chased by zombies. What should you do? Lock the door, run for the hills, or plant a garden, which I guess you need to know about Plants vs. Zombies for that one. And let's say your user's just thinking. They're like, I really don't know. Well, if a person, again, back to that pause, they don't say anything, they probably don't know what to say. So you don't just wait forever. And you don't say, I didn't hear you, which isn't really going to help. Instead, you just reprompt them with the options. And let's say they're still confused. I don't know, maybe. Then you do something called escalated errors. So here you're trying to say, maybe it's hard for them to remember to say the full thing, so we'll give them another way, like just say the number. And that sort of is an escape hatch for them, and they move on correctly. Again, users are usually trying to cooperate with your system. They are not usually trying to just mess with it and fail. They want to participate, so help them out. If you come away from this 30 minutes, this is the only thing you remember, that would be awesome, which is design for how people actually talk and not how you want them to talk. Again, a lot of people, when they create these things, think, I'm going to make my prompt, that is what the system is saying, so clear and correct that people will obviously say exactly what I expect them to. Doesn't happen. Even if you've been designing these for 20 years, people will still say things that surprise you. And you have to have that respect for the way humans talk and not try to cram them into the way you want them to go. If you remember this, you will be more successful. A little bit about screens and other surfaces. So the Google Assistant is on the voice-only surface, the smart speaker, also on your phone. But there's also these new types of experiences coming out, and they're called smart displays. Has anyone here ever used, whether it's Google or Amazon, or used a smart display like a Google Home Hub or an Amazon? Yeah, so they're not super common yet, but they're coming out more. And these are called voice-forward devices. They're a little different than like a tablet or your phone, which are very touch-based. Voice-forward is for, like, let's say you're in the kitchen and your hands are covered in flour, or maybe you're holding a baby, or for whatever reason, or maybe you're standing a little too far away from it to touch it. So your voice is the main way you communicate, but it has visuals, it has videos, pictures, things like that. So if you are going to design for something like the Google Assistant ecosystem, you need to think about all these different surfaces. And I wish I could tell you the design is exactly the same, whether you're doing voice only or your phone or whatever, but unfortunately it's a little bit different. So our advice is you always start with the most complex case, which is the voice only, like you saw with business hours. And then you go to your visual display and you say, where would it enhance things if we had a picture or a video or a carousel or something like that? All right, so the last part of this is just a little bit about the future. This is purely my speculation. This is not Google's roadmap or anything like that. But just I like to think about, how might things change as time goes on. And this is the Future Conference. So this is a trash can that exists today, not in the future, from Simply Human. It costs $250. And you can say, open can, and it will open, and you can throw your trash in. What do we think about this? Rubbish. One question is, are we going to have to start talking to everything around us, everything in our house? There was a great Wall Street Journal cartoon that had a kitchen, and everything in the house, the dog bowl, the garbage disposal, the fridge, all had different names, and you had to say the name of each thing that you wanted to use. I hope that is not the future. I do think the future is that we will be talking to a lot more things, devices, walls, mirrors. At CES this year, there was a voice-activated toilet. I don't know what you do with that, but it's definitely going to become more and more common as a way, as another option. And by the way, again, I'm very big on voice, but voice is not going to be it's not going to become the only modality. There is going to be a place for visuals, for touch. These are all very important gestures. Voice is just one modality for communication. When we work in this field of voice, people are very emotional and attached to their voice. They feel much differently about recording their voice than they do about typing in words into a search engine. So we in this business have to be really careful. We have to treat the data with great care and with privacy and anonymize things. But we also have to be very transparent. So to take the Google Assistant as an example, for anyone who's not familiar with how this works, it's waiting to hear what we call the hot word, which is OKG or Hey G. And then it lights up, and it does start recording at that point and starts streaming that to the cloud to figure out what you actually want. it's not recording anything up until that point. It's just waiting to hear that hot word. Nothing gets recorded, even locally on your device, until it hears that hot word. If you go on your app on your phone, you can see every single time the hot word was invoked, even if it might be accidental. I used to say to my son, "Okay, boo," and it would light up the Google Home sometimes. So you can go in the app, you can see every time it was awakened. You can also click and listen to the recording of what it recorded. And if you want, you can delete it. And it's not just deleted on your device and your phone, it's deleted everywhere. So we want to make sure that people have a little bit more insight and control into that. Because again, not everybody, I'm sure there's people in this room who's like, I'm not putting a smart speaker in my house, are you crazy? So we want to make sure that people who do use it are very comfortable and understand what's happening to the data. This is a photo I took in the San Jose airport of some robot babysitters. They're not babysitting robots, they're supposed to be babysitting kids. And there's a human in there in this ball pit as well. I usually see the kids playing with a human more than I see them playing with the robots. But it makes me think about this idea of a lifelong virtual companion. Let's say you have a virtual companion from when you're a little kid and it grows up with you. It knows your favorite color, it knows your moods. Imagine you can come home from work and you can be like, oh, I had the worst day, and it will just listen in just the way you like. It won't be like, why didn't you do the dishes last night, and how come you're home so late, and blah, blah, blah. So that could be kind of nice, right? There's a famous chatbot in China called VUIs that's really popular, and I heard that the most popular topic for teenagers talking to VUIs is to complain about their parents, which I actually think is kind of nice. I think everyone should have a safe space, kids or adults, to complain about their parents. But what are some of the downsides, right? I mean, what if it makes people even less likely to talk to other people? What if I'm mad at my best friend and I'm like, to my virtual assistant, I'm like, can you tell my best friend's virtual assistant that I'm mad at her? You know, and it makes you not want to interact. Some of you may have heard of the researcher Sherry Turkle. She's kind of horrified by all this. Remember, she was talking about, she had watched an older woman tell a very sad story to a robot about her son passing away. And Sherry Turkle was just horrified. She's like, how can we be telling these emotional stories to a thing that has no capacity for emotion? So, you know, I think there's still a lot to be thought about here. I used to work on a healthcare app that had a virtual nurse avatar, and I would speak to patients sometimes, and some of them got really attached to talking to that avatar and really enjoyed it. You know, loneliness is an epidemic, especially among older folks. And what are some of the things we can do to help ease that? So I think it's an interesting thing to think about. I want to close with this video. One of the other advances that's coming is the idea of silent speech or subvocalization. So one of the issues with voice user interfaces is that most of us are not comfortable talking to them out in public. If I'm on the bus, I don't want to be talking to my voice assistant about my mammogram results. If we are at work, it's not so much about saying private things, but if everybody is talking to their computer all day long, that is going to be super annoying. So this is just a prototype. It's out of MIT Media Lab. But it kind of gives you an indication of where this might go.
(10:43 a.m.)
So you couldn't see him, but he said time, but you couldn't see his lips move or hear him. And then it responds into his ear.
Total $10.07.
About this is this idea of the augmentation. It's not about replacing something that a human can do. It's a tool, like a hammer. It's going to help people because voice is often a more efficient and frictionless way to accomplish a task. And this will allow you to do that in more places.